Hello, BookTube, and welcome to our ongoing read-along. We're reading the middle third of Anthony Trollope's 1869 novel, Phineas Finn, the second book in what is sort of nebulously called his Palliser or parliamentary novels. They don't really have a unifying theme except politics, although that gets dropped by the wayside whenever it pleases the author. So this book really is the first of the really political novels. The first one, the one that we read last year, wasn't quite so political. This one has a lot of the workings of Parliament in it, and we get those workings through the viewpoint character of the title character, Phineas Finn, a gorgeous and very likable young Irishman from no great financial means, who takes it into his heart to have an ambition to get into Parliament. And he's at first helped in that regard by financial assistance from his doctor father, who's by no means super wealthy, but manages to get him at least in the door. And it goes from there. And Trollope makes very little bones about the fact that Phineas Finn is, in addition to being extremely pleasant and extremely handsome, also extremely lucky. Things seem to work out for him. He becomes romantically enamored of Lady Laura Standish, but she marries the soulless prig Mr. Kennedy solely for his money. He's an immensely wealthy drip of a guy, and Phineas then becomes romantically attached to Violet Effingham, who has long been considered this sort of matrimonial property of Lady Laura's brother, Lord Chiltern, a violent but honest and likable young lord who's permanently on the outs, it seems, with his father, the Earl of Brentford, and who doesn't take kindly to the news that Phineas Finn is trying to horn in on his territory, what he views as the love of his life. And as the segment that we're reading today opens, by random chance, after a session of Parliament late at night, Phineas Finn happens to notice, just as he's walking outside, he happens to notice two strangers following closely in the footsteps of Mr. Kennedy, who's also a member of Parliament. And something strikes Finn as wrong about that. Something seems odd. So he loops around in himself, doesn't make himself known, just loops around so that he can see how that progresses, and notices right away that the men are attacking Mr. Kennedy. They are garroting him. One of them has a string around his neck and is trying to garrote him. A very popular thing. Trollope returns to it a couple of times in his fiction as a weird thing, as a weird danger that might come upon a gentleman out at night in London. And Phineas Finn saves the day, and thereby earns the gratitude of everyone involved. It's pure luck that he does it, but it makes him even more of a golden boy. And when the time comes, he gets bad news. The bad news is that the little borough that he was originally sent to Parliament to represent is reverting back to its old imperious Irish lord who wants it back. This is at a time there's a reform bill that is slowly grinding its way through Parliament all through the course of this novel. This is at a time when all of that is starting to change. Pocket boroughs, private little enterprises like that, where lords basically control an entire electorate and never have to worry about being voted out. They just have a permanent place in Parliament. When that whole system was starting to come under scrutiny in preparation to be destroyed, or partially destroyed. And Phineas is distraught, of course, but it turns out that Lord Brentford has a pocket borough of his own. And since Mr. Kennedy is Lord Brentford's son-in-law, and Mr. Kennedy was saved by sheer luck by Phineas Finn, he suggests that Finn take the borough. Now, Phineas Finn is a reformer. He has considered this sort of stuff odious, and yet he has done nothing but benefit by it. And Trollope gives us a wonderful moment where we just watch in the course of less than a paragraph, we watch his admittedly thin ethics just collapse. How does it go here? And if it were right that it should be accepted by any liberal candidate, the borough in question, then why not by him? The logic of this argument seemed to him to be perfect. He felt something like a sting of reproach as he told himself that in truth this great offer was made to him not on account of the excellence of his politics, but because he had been instrumental in saving Lord Brentford's son-in-law from the violence of garrotters. But he crushed these qualms of conscience as being over-scrupulous and, as he told himself, not practical. You must take the world as you find it, with a struggle to be something more honest than those around you. Phineas, as he preached to himself this sermon, declared to himself that they who attempted more than this flew too high in the clouds to be of service to men and women upon earth. Just as easy as that. But you thought it would be hard. And that mention about being of service to women on earth is certainly a little dig on the part of the author at this Tom Jones-style character. Phineas Finn is irresistible. And his affections are not, and when we're meeting him here in this book, they are not deep-rooted. He gets one female fascination into his head and sticks with it to the point of pride. In the course of these chapters, he's actually willing to fight a duel with Lord Chiltern, and does. But then the next fascination comes along and doesn't seem to have much trouble displacing the older ones. And these are more of the little troubles that come to Phineas Finn's doorstep. He is, for instance, violently accosted by Lord Chiltern, who demands that they duel over Lady Laura, over Violet Effingham. He demands that they duel, and that's illegal in England, so they go across the channel, and Lord Chiltern actually wings Phineas Finn in the shoulder. And nothing more comes of it. The duel is called off. That's it. The pointlessness of the whole thing is dealt with by Trollope mainly by not dealing with it. We barely even see the action. It takes place almost in between two paragraphs. And in almost no time at all, Phineas Finn is back in London, back doing all the normal stuff that he does. Another misfortune that comes to his door is that earlier on in the book, we saw that he made the mistake of co-signing a loan with his wasteful Irish colleague, Lawrence Fitzgibbon, who is obviously a sot and a lout, and who doesn't care about the bill. The bill comes due, and since Phineas Finn's name is on it, the oily bill collector, Mr. Clarkson, starts showing up at Phineas Finn's house at all hours and helping himself to tea and butter and saying that he'll do anything for his gentleman, the gentleman in his loan book, if only they'll be punctual. And Phineas Finn he's not a highfalutin character at all, but he's affronted by this overfamiliarity on the part of a bill collector. And it gets even worse when Mr. Clarkson shows up at Parliament and is only restrained by the bailiff from actually dunning him in front of his parliamentary peers. All hopeless. Phineas Finn has no money and has no ability to pay this guy. And when he confronts Lawrence Fitzgibbon, Fitzgibbon is so blithe about it. Says, oh, just let him come to your house and eat your food once in a while. As long as he feels that you're not locking him out, he'll be okay. No mention of paying or anything like that. And in addition to this, there's also preferment. It's not just a borough. It's not just staying in Parliament. Phineas Finn wants to climb the ladder. And no opportunities seem to be available. And he seems to be the only one in the book. Certainly we as readers are not distressed by any of this. He's distressed by it all. But no one else seems to doubt that this is the luckiest person in the world. We as readers certainly don't doubt it. He's invited to a gigantic political party given by Lady Glencora, who is in this book as a name only, barely actively present at all. At this dinner, he meets Madame Max Goesler, the widow of a wealthy Austrian banker, who is now the toast of London. She has an exclusive dinner party set. She's obscenely wealthy and extremely articulate and outspoken in a nice way, in an intriguing way. She also is physically intriguing. She's not English, and she doesn't look it or act it. And immediately, Phineas Finn is seated next to her at the dinner given by Lady Glencora. It's unfortunate, I think, there's only so much you can fit into one book. The three main female characters in this book, Lady Laura Standish, Violet Effingham, and now Madame Max, don't leave any room for Lady Glencora. So although she is prominent in other Palliser novels, she's not very prominent in this one. When Phineas is seated next to Madame Max, she immediately intrigues him. She sets him back on his pins. She's not deferential. She's very interesting. And he becomes fascinated with her. Just as easy as that, he does. So, and all the other things happen easily as well. For instance, Lawrence Fitzgibbon's sister comes to Phineas's rooms and says, "I think you should know I paid your bill." I put two and two together. You didn't complain about it yourself, but I put two and two together and figured out you'd been unwise enough to go in on a bill with my brother. That's a bad idea. Don't do it again. But I paid it. So that is taken completely off Phineas Finn's plate. Same thing with preferment. The vacancy opens up way up the ladder. Everybody moves up a step, and Phineas gets a note from Lord Brentford saying, that a spot will be yours, £1,000 a year. Not as high as Phineas originally wanted to go, but the first step on a ladder, perfectly fine by him, and effortless. Absolutely effortless. Another borough is found for him. A job is found for him. His debt is paid so that the bill collector can disappear. That is largely the bulk of the chapters that we read today. They are basically the rise of Phineas Finn. The minor obstacles that are in his way are dispensed with. Sewn along the way in these chapters are maybe the hint of future obstacles, especially in the person of Quintus Slide, the odious newspaper man who apparently wanted that vacant borough for himself, even though Phineas is incredulous at the very idea. When it says to him, you might as well say that you had an idea of going to heaven and you wanted my help. There's no way that it would ever happen. So I don't know what you're angry with me for. And it makes an enemy of Quintus Slide, which, as we will learn in this book and in many other Palliser novels, is a bad thing to do. It's a bad thing to make an enemy of the unscrupulous press. And that largely wraps up these chapters. They end rather charmingly with, finally, after many, many chapters apart, of Phineas going. Lord Chiltern comes back to London. He goes to Lord Chiltern's room wondering how things are going to go. And they shake hands and are immediately friends again. It's a great little reminder on the part of, on Trollope's part, that these are all young people. These characters, they don't seem it because it's all stiff 19th century fiction. There's a whole paragraph about the various Kremlin-watching details that Phineas undergoes for someone using his first name. Some of it feels so officious and alien that we forget these people are very young. Chiltern and Phineas Finn were dueling earlier in this segment that we're reading. They're fast friends again by the time it's over. And the last thing of note, especially for the future of the Palliser series that happens, is that at another big gathering, Madame Max is also a guest. Phineas is a guest. All of the talk of London are guests. And one last guest makes his appearance. And that is the Duke of Omnium. Not, as longtime readers of the Palliser novels will immediately think, Plantagenet Palliser. Plantagenet Palliser is Lady Glencora's husband, and he is, all throughout this novel, like her, on the periphery. They will both be central characters in later novels. But they're not in this book. And Plantagenet Palliser is, at the end of the Palliser novels, the Duke of Omnium. But in this book, he is just the nephew and heir to the old Duke of Omnium. And the Dukedom of Omnium is obscenely wealthy, enormously powerful, enormously respected, in odd ways, in ways that Trollope takes pains to try to explain. He does it in this book. This is the first time. And he also does it in a couple of other books. I wanted to read you his first attempt because I still try to grapple with what must be on our author's mind when he's thinking these things. He's trying to describe the Duke of Omnium. And he's doing it in comparison to other dukes, including the Duke of St. Bungay, who we've met and known. He's the one who's referred to in this book just colloquially as the Duke, a very active parliamentarian who has been the gray presence behind many cabinets and who is described in great detail earlier as just a wonderful guy, as a wonderful, sound, non-dramatic counselor. And we get, what do we get here? Now, Mr. Palliser was the Duke's nephew and heir, and the Duke of Omnium was a very great person indeed. I hardly know why it should have been so, but the Duke of Omnium was certainly a greater man in public estimation than the other Duke then present, the Duke of St. Bungay. The Duke of St. Bungay was a useful man who had been so all his life, sitting in cabinets and serving his country, constant as any peer in the House of Lords, always ready to take on his own shoulders any troublesome work required of him, than whom Mr. Mildmay or Mr. Mildmay's predecessor at the head of the Liberal party had no more devoted adherent. But the Duke of Omnium had never done a day's work on behalf of his country. They both wore the Garter, the Order of the Garter. The Duke of St. Bungay having earned it by service, the Duke of Omnium having been decorated with the blue ribbon because he was the Duke of Omnium. The one was a moral, good man, a good husband, a good father, and a good friend. The other did not bear quite so high a reputation. But men and women thought but little of the Duke of St. Bungay, while the other Duke was regarded with an almost reverential awe. I think the secret lay in the simple fact that the Duke of Omnium had not been common in the eyes of the people. He had contrived to envelop himself in something of the ancient mystery of wealth and rank. And that's followed up with that. All of that is summarized in an easy comment that another character later makes, which is the Duke of Omnium is so grand a person that he doesn't really need to be anything other than the Duke of Omnium. But I love that moment because that's Trollope talking to you. That's Trollope simply talking to you. It underscores the thing that really struck me when I was rereading these chapters for this read-along, which is how much, again, I know this is a familiar refrain of mine, but how much I prefer Trollope to Dickens. Dickens never takes the reader aside in such a comfortable way to just talk to them about anything. Never. It never happens. He's too full of himself to do that, and also the melodrama of Dickens. I know that his devoted fans love that about him, and I've read lots of books about it and how well it's done, and I suppose on some objective level I can say that it is well done, but think about the characters in these pages. If Dickens had handled them. Think about Mr. Clarkson, that odious bill collector. Here, his oiliness is allowed to make an impression on us. It isn't beaten over. We're not beaten over the head with it. And Quintus Slide, oh my God. Oh my God. The horrible newspaperman who is going to be so much trouble in the last third of this book. Dickens would have made him unbearable in all the wrong ways. And, I'm not sure that the female characters would have fared any better. Madame Max is a tough thing to do. She's a tough character to work out. She would clearly want to be involved in politics herself. She's doubly barred by being a foreigner and by being a woman. But what would Dickens have made of her? I don't like to think about it. I certainly like quite a bit of Dickens. I have all of his novels, but when it comes to something like this, I know it's not a word that's often associated with Trollope, but I am impressed by his subtlety. And I like it. So that wraps it up for this read-along on this horrible, gray, icy, cold day. That got us to, let me get to the list of chapters. That got us to The Duelist Meet, which is chapter 49. So from this point out, we'll start with chapter 50, again successful, and we'll read all the way to the end. Chapter 76, so that's 25 more chapters for next week, and that will finish Phineas Finn. That will be 2 Palliser novels in by that point. But what I really want to know, as usual, at the end of this particular read along, is what you made of these chapters. We get a lot more of politics, a lot more of the reform bill, but we also get more of this unfolding cast. It's a classic Trollope move, something that not a lot of Victorian novelists do or feel confident doing, to introduce such a major character as Madame Max so late in the book. And I think it works perfectly, but because you meet people at dinner parties, at least people who put on pants do, and then you want to know, who was that person that I was sitting next to? Who was that person I was talking to? And you go and find the people who know them. It feels organic to me, but did it to you? And all the rest of it, the duel, for instance. Think of how Dickens, I shouldn't ramp on Dickens because Wilkie Collins would have been no better. Think about how many Victorian novelists would have succumbed to the temptation to make the duel hyper dramatic, hyper scrutinized, and the focus of the whole chapter, when it very much does not happen this way in this book. What did you make of all of that? Not so much the exoticism of the duel itself, although this is the Phineas Finn has to be one of the last English novels where anyone fights a duel. It was very much on its way out by the 1860s. But all the rest of it as well. I was reading, when I was reading these chapters, I was a little bit worried that some of you would start to get disappointed with the book because of how easy everything is for Phineas Finn. If you felt that way, I want to assure you that the book's original readers also felt that way. And Trollope heard them, as he always did. And the sequel to this book, the direct sequel, there's one Palliser novel next that isn't a direct sequel to this book. The direct sequel is Phineas Redo. And in Phineas Redux, Trollope gives Phineas Finn some trying times, some true dark nights of the soul, but not so much in the chapters that we've read so far. Did that bother you? Or did you find, I noticed in the comments that a lot of you agreed with my comments about how Phineas Finn was kind of a shallow, pretty character, but that you felt yourself falling under his charm anyway. I thought that was fascinating. And I want to know if that continues here. This is also the section of the book where we learn in heartbreaking detail that Lady Laura Standish is paying the price for her marriage of convenience. She is not happy. She's miserable with Paul Kennedy. What did you make of that? Did you feel like it was her just desserts, or did it wring your heart anyway? I found it hard. Trollope's really good with female characters. His female characters are so good. I find it hard to believe it didn't wring your heart. But let me know. Let me know all about it. I want to know all about it. And I'll wrap this up for now. But we'll be back next week to finish out Phineas Finn. So you've got 25 chapters to read and enjoy. They are humdingerly good, so you won't be sorry. And I'll wrap this up for now, but we'll meet again next week. Thank you, BookTube.